Today, a way forward for regional banking. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, one latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today I'm joined by Robbie Barwick from the Citizens Party. Hi Robbie.
Hi Martin.
And very important conversation today because there is a very important chance here to give a really good kick in the right direction for regional banking.
There is. So let's just put those details up front first. So we often get into discussions and then sometimes later I think, should have highlighted some of that stuff. But the bottom line is this. There's a regional banking task force has just been appointed. This is a discussion paper on its website that we'll put a link to below for people to look at. They are taking submissions until the 18th of December. So that's a bit less than a month for people to make a submission to this task force. And let's go through the details because I think you really want to make a submission. And also, let me just make this point. Define regional quite broadly because it's actually a problem that's not, don't just think about it as banking in remote Australia. The banks are closing down branches all over the place, including in major city suburbs, and they're ripping out ATMs everywhere as well, right? So there's this task force is an opportunity to raise all of that. If you're concerned about the winding down of banking services, if you're concerned about the push away from cash to force people into electronic transactions, if you're concerned about, as we are, a more positive perspective for regional Australia where we can have a postal bank, or any of those things, and any number of other issues that you may know that you relate to this, please make a submission. This would be a great opportunity. My concern always, Martin, with this is that the government goes through the motions. In a sense, this task force has been forced on them. They go through the motions and they always intend to sweep it under the carpet, right? So we always call upon the public, get engaged, and your presence, your engagement can stop them from doing that, right? And make it much bigger than they anticipated.
And it's worth saying, I think, Robbie, that this is a direct fallout from the Australia Post affair.
Absolutely.
And the inquiry in the Senate about that, because one of the things that clearly came out from that was that senators representing regional areas actually agree that there was a big problem.
No, for sure. And therefore, DFA viewers, pat yourself on the back, because we made that Australia Post inquiry happen.
Yeah.
We had some rather intense discussions on this show about the regional banking problem. Right, once that sense of it became clear to me, I remember feeling personally infuriated when I learned that the thing that got Christine Holgate into trouble, the watchers, were a gift or an award she gave to the executives who helped her land a deal that saved banking services in regional Australia.
Yep.
And that's why she did it, right? And we put we publicised the heck out of that. The Nationals, I know, there were Nationals that were rather unhappy that it was parties like the Citizens Party and then later Pauline Hanson came in and took the lead on fighting for justice for Australia Post, the licensed post office group, and Christine Holgate. And so the Nationals decided it sort of was a kick in the butt for them. And then National Senator Perrin Davey put up a motion on regional banking services. That evolved into a proposal for an inquiry, and the government saw the Nationals were serious, and they've put up this task force. Now, the two people heading the task force are the same National Senator Perrin Davey and Michael Sukkar, the Assistant Treasurer. Right there is a problem because Michael Sukkar, we saw how he performed in the fight on the cash ban, Martin, and we defeated him on that. But he and his treasurer and his fellow assistant treasurer, Jane Hume, they're just there to do the bidding of the banks. So what they've done is they've set up a task force, and the membership of the task force is those two, representatives of the big four banks and a Representative Australia Post. Now, it's good there's a Representative Australia Post on there, and there may be, I can't remember if there's a few others, but essentially the presence of Sukkar and the banks on this task force does not bode well for it, right? That's why we need the public to come in and get behind the good intent or impulse in the National Party and strengthen their hand and really load up with powerful submissions, calling it out, calling out the problem for what it is, right? Which is the banks just want to profiteer and therefore, minimise their expenses in regional Australia. Consequences be damned, right? And because the big four are an oligopoly in Australia, they know that there's very few alternatives outside of them for the public to go to.
Absolutely, and it's worth saying, Robbie, a couple of things. In that paper, the issues paper actually is not bad. There are some important facts there, although there are some other facts that we can talk about in a second. 26% reduction over the last 4 years in regional areas of branch representation. 26%, that's down by a quarter. That doesn't include, though, branches that used to be open 5 days a week and now they're open 4 hours a week, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? If you actually incorporated that in as well, so the actual physical access, it's a much bigger drop.
No.
The second point is that a lot of the facilities that used to be in those branches are no longer in those branches. So even when they're there, they don't do all the things they used to do, right? Which is, again, being missed over. And then the third thing, of course, and this is what all the banks keep saying on the Australian Bankers Association, well, everybody goes online. Okay, but there's two problems with that. Firstly, have you ever tried to go online in a lot of regional areas? It's really, really difficult, right? And there are a lot of people who, really are not well connected. The other is that there are many things you cannot do online. And so therefore the whole concept of just saying, well, everyone's now online, so that's not an issue, is completely missing the point. And we know from our research, and you've also looked at it independently as well, Robbie, that where you have a vibrant financial centre in a local community, be it a post office or be it a bank, whatever, right, it keeps that location alive. It helps the commercial life, and it thrives, right? As soon as you take that heartbeat away, then effectively the community is more likely to fall over and die. And so this is far more than just the commercial cost to the banks. This is about the future life and expectancy of many, many communities across the country and many, many businesses across the country. That's why this is such an important conversation, right? And then coming back to your point about, so who's on the committee, there is not enough representation on that committee of the pure, true interests of households and businesses across the country, in my view. That's why we have to make sure that the submissions that we put in go broad and make some of these points, because without it, it could well just be, another one where it just passes through and nothing really happens. This is an opportunity to make a fundamental stake in the ground change to the way that regional banking works.
Well, we need people who watch this show to share it with everyone in regional Australia especially, right, so that they realise, well, hang on, I can send in an email here and have my say. And we should flood this thing with the true perspective of regional Australia. And I think it's so easy to poke holes in some of the things I've said in this issues paper, Martin. We may as well do that, right? And people can see the shape of where they're coming from, and therefore, be very tempted to get into to have their say. I'll just start on this. This is what you referenced a second ago. This is the graph they have. We'll come back to this, but essentially, what you have there is the scale of the problem in 4 years of branch closures across Australia. And as you can see, heavy in regional, remote Australia, branch closures. But that's what the first two are major cities in the regional, they've been copying it as well. What I will say is that does not include Australia Post branches or out licensed post offices, because they've held steady. So that doesn't include those. This is the terms of reference, right? And right here is where it gets quite woolly.
And just to be clear, this is for the task force itself, right?
For the task force.
Not for the inquiry, because it's a bit complicated. There's an inquiry running, going into the task force. This is about the task force overall.
This is the task force.
Yep.
So the task force will they've written the terms of reference in such a way they're not bound to anything by the terms of reference, really, right? So they're going to analyse the trends in branch closures. Yeah, wow, good. That's already been done, and I'll give you some examples of that. Assess the impacts of these branch closures on individuals, businesses, community organisations, etc. And that's the part that I really urge people, especially if you've seen what a branch closure, losing your local bank does, you get in there and tell them, right? Because, and especially if you don't buy this idea that, you can just go online and everything's fine, right? No, there's a reason to have a bank branch, and you make sure that sticks. And then this is the out for the banks. Assess how banks transition their services and delivery models to communities. It assumes that they're doing that. Well, I think that's an assumption that's not fully backed up by the facts. Really, it's not just good enough to say, you're online now. And this is a real out. Identify alternatives to bank branch models. Right now, we don't even have to, in this new age, we don't even have to have branches, right? There's alternative models to that. We can go through some of the things that they identify in that regard. So just go down here a little bit. The task force, by examining the role of bank branches and banking services in regional Australia, builds on the work the government is doing to ensure regions have the jobs and services they need. Well, so is the government doing such work? That's the question, right? By standing by while this has happened, I would argue, they always talk about it. There's a lot of rhetoric, but, just how much work are they really doing? Nevertheless, it does acknowledge there's a link there between the functionality of local communities and their economies and financial services. Good. All right. So I've gone and highlighted my section here. I just want to point out some of the things that they have to acknowledge. They've got here, they provide context. Historically, banks tend to deliver these services through their branches, though Australia Post also has a long history of providing some banking services. That's true. And then listen to this bit. Over time, however, the provision of banking services has changed. Changes in financial regulation, technological developments like the growing use of electronic banking, shifts in consumer demands and demographic shifts towards larger cities and towns have contributed to the pressure on banks to reduce their branch networks. Now, I think that's a mostly dishonest statement, actually, Martin. And I'll come back, there's a reference later, because there's a bit of a chicken and egg quality here, right? Because we know the banks actually set out to force people to change their behaviour. And what that's implying is the banks are responding to the change in behaviour. And that's actually less true than they're trying to present. But the reason I said mostly is this part here, changes in financial regulation, is true. Because even going back as far as not the Wallace inquiry and report in 1998, but the Campbell report in 1982, the very first financial system inquiry, Campbell recommended the privatisation of the Commonwealth Bank and forecast when it happened, just getting rid of the Commonwealth Bank alone would result in banks going on a branch closure spree. And then he predicted eventually it would settle down. Well, half his prediction was right. Banks went on a branch closure spree and they've continued it. Right? It goes in sort of spurts. So this was something that they knew by definition. That the section in the Wallace, in the Campbell report from 1982 was basically saying these banks are only maintaining a certain number of their branches because they have to compete with the Commonwealth Bank. And that's there to make sure those banking services, because it was government owned, are available for all Australians. Right? And this is what's useful to know, to see through some of these arguments. And I'll come back to this chicken and egg question in a second, because there's actually a checklist that these guys go through. Here's where it gets shocking. Might even highlight this if that works. Okay. This is quite an acknowledgement. The number of branches in regional and remote Australia has fallen from about 2,500 to 1,900 in 4 years to June 2021, a decline of almost a quarter, with 5% decline in branches in the past year. And remember, we pointed out with the one of the reasons that when Christine Holgate took over Australia Post, when she said to the licensed post officers, "What's your main gripe? What's your number one pain point?" Angela Cramp said banking, because the queues outside of licensed post offices were growing longer from people who were queuing up to do their banking at the post office because the banks had closed their branches, but the banks weren't paying any more money towards Australia Post for providing that service. And that's what Christine Holgate fixed. There have been similar declines at a national level, with bank branches declining from about 5,800 to 4,500 over the past 4 years. But the impact on regional Australia has been enormous. That's backed up by that graphic that we saw before. This is the reference, though, to the fact that other banks' face-to-face points of presence in regional remote Australia have seen a more modest decline from about 2,500 to 2,400. That's the red bits there. That's so. Okay. I think that must be the. Just to be honest, I'm not actually sure what other bank face-to-face points of presence mean, as I referenced earlier. But note this here: bank at post numbers are steady at around 1,900, and that is absolutely true, right? That's the value of bank at post. And then look at this. The number of ATMs has also declined, with the total number of active ATMs nationally having fallen from about 20% since its peak in late 2016. Think about what 20% of ATMs means. There's thousands and thousands. There's tens of thousands of ATMs across Australia. They've pulled out a fifth of them in 5 years, 1/5. And this goes to the chicken and egg question. You're making it harder for people to use cash, because you're making it harder for them to access cash, right? And then they claim, "Oh, people's habits are changing." So I don't know. Do you have a comment on any of that yet, Martin?
Well, let me just come in on that. So there's a couple of points. The first is that if you look at the statistics, APRA actually has quite good statistics on point of presence. And there's been a very heavy decline of ATMs in regional areas. In fact, the decline is more severe than in some other areas. And it's interesting, I was talking to somebody the other day who actually used to be able to just go down the road to get cash. They now have to go 30 kilometres down the road to get cash, because essentially their last ATM disappeared. The other point I want to make is this concept of the last person standing in a particular location is alive and well. Nobody wants to be the last bank in the location, right? So what tends to happen is that everyone's rushing for the exit because they don't want to be the last one, the last one in town, right? And then the final point to make is that clearly there are services which can be done, but there are also services which can't really be done through Australia Post, or indeed via remote services. So, and again, to highlight the other point I made, remember that statistic, the 26% fall, does not include those branches that are now open just a few hours a week rather than full time, right? The number of hours have dropped even further.
No, that's right. It's a parallel to unemployment figures, where they measure the actual jobs and not the fact that you go from full-time to part-time jobs, and the lost hours lost are greater than the jobs lost. All right. Well, so let me get to the apple and the chicken and the egg bit here. It's worth going through this series of paragraphs starting here. ATM and branch declines have also occurred amid a sizable decline in the use of cash, compared with the value of cash withdrawals from cards and ATMs having almost halved in September 2021 compared to its peak in December 2008, and down around a third in the past 2 years. So they're saying there's less money coming out of ATMs. Yes, but by your own admission, you've dripped 20% of ATMs out. Right? Of course there's less money coming out of ATMs, because what do we know about the total amount of cash in the system? It's never been greater. This is the big contradiction of the last few years. In the period they pushed the cash ban and then the COVID stuff, etc. The amount of cash on issue by the Reserve Bank into the Australian economy has never been greater, right? I'll keep reading. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, cash was used in 20% of all consumer payments in 2019, down from 69% in 2007, while cards were used in 23% of payments, up from 26% in 2007. And of course, you do have to acknowledge that, there is an ease of convenience and, tap and pay and all that kind of stuff. However, I want to acknowledge the fact that you've got to separate the bank's intentions here. And we put it on our show last year, middle of last year, the banks bragged in mid 2020 that the reaction to COVID had allowed them to achieve goals in a few months that they had thought we wouldn't have achieved for 5 years, right? And that meant they had those goals. But once the public has become more aware of this intention by the banks, there's actually been a backlash. Now, I thought this particular one was hilarious. Branch closures are not unique to Australia, with just under a quarter of the branches that were operating in September 2019 closing by March 2021 in New Zealand. And of course, that's an interesting point until you remember that New Zealand's banks are owned by Australia's banks. Of course, they're pursuing the same policy in New Zealand. Do these people think we're idiots? So look at this. So this is a footnote about Bank at Post, because this table here is a table that shows you the services provided by different bank branches, Bank at Post, app, internet banking, etc. And they're basically trying to say that, whereas bank branches provide all services and Bank at Post doesn't, a combination of Bank at Post and the electronic stuff, you're effectively covered. But I just want to read out the footnote here. Bank at Post, which involves post offices acting as an agent and providing services to customers of over 80 banks and other financial institutions, is another significant alternative to bank branches. This is a commercial partnership that banks have entered into for Australia Post to deliver services and have involved substantial investments in the capability, technology and security of Bank at Post outlets to make sure customers can bank easily, safely and in a way that suits them. Amongst its services, it enables customers to withdraw and deposit cash, check account details, deposit checks, pay bills, transfer funds, make credit card payments. This can be done to over 3,500 post offices, including more than 1,900 in rural and remote locations. There are 1,145 Bank at Post offices in regional and rural communities with no bank branch. And that's the important bit right there, right? No bank branch, that is the alternative. And that's what Christine Holgate saved by saving Bank at Post, which is now as at risk as it ever was, despite the bank's lip service, right? They have no real fundamental commitment to Bank at Post. And that's why we'll come back to that in a second. That's why we need to have a solution here, which is that what we consider the ultimate solution to be a postal bank. But let's just go. Here's a list of consultation questions. I won't go through them all, but now that we've pointed out those things from the issues paper, and that's not 17 pages, so it's easy to read. But this is the key bit. They're asking you to respond to any and all of these questions in making your submission. And do so in a way, though, that sees through the premise of the questions, right? Let's put it back, shove it back in their face. No, that premise is wrong. Here's what the actual experience on the ground is, all right? So I would propose, and our organisation will certainly do it, that we go on the offensive with this task force and make them an offer they can't refuse. Put up the alternative, the solution, the way forward, as we said at the beginning of the show, that actually solves this problem. The objective is to guarantee banking services in regional Australia. And by banking services, I would hope we agree with the guaranteed banking services that serve the community, that are good for the community, right? Not be an outlet for a big four bank that's just there to draw the few customers it draws in. It's looking for ways to fleece them. So yeah, how can we guarantee banking services in regional Australia that actually serve regional Australia and provide that assistance for the economic development of regional Australia, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the reason the Citizens Party got involved in the Australia Post issue and looked twice at what happened to Christine Holgate is because we had developed a policy for a postal bank. And this is actually a well-known policy around the world. It's very successful. Bernie Sanders and Senator Kristen Gillibrand in the United States have a bill in the Congress there to bring back the US. The US once had a postal bank, to bring it back there. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia effectively started off as a postal bank. It was able to set up branches all across Australia through post offices straight away, and then eventually evolve its own branch network. We think the Australian banking system has suffered terribly since the Commonwealth Bank was privatised, because it took away that necessity for the private banks to compete with the public option, and no smaller bank has been able to come along and do that. Right? They either fail, or if they're successful, these smaller startups, they get bought up by the big banks anyway. Right? So the oligopoly is intact, and a lot of the problems in the banking system stem from that oligopoly, including the bad behaviour of the banks, is partly explained by that oligopoly. Because if they've got no one to compete with, and they have this, wink, wink, nudge, nudge way of competing with each other, effectively a secret cartel, right? And that came out of the Royal Commission. Then they know that they'll get away with their bad behaviour, right? You bring in a public option they have to compete with, and boy, will that give them a reality check, right? So that's been our policy. We've developed a bill for it that we have been working with Bob Katter to get introduced in Parliament, and I can't confirm it, but that may happen sooner rather than later. We have to see, but I'm not sure it's going to happen this sitting of Parliament, but I can't rule it out, right? For instance, but there's a lot of things up in the air. Nevertheless, it'll happen eventually that we get the bill introduced, and this is a concept that has broad bipartisan agreement. I was in a lift in a hotel in Canberra, and Bill Shorten was on the lift, and I engaged him in conversation. At the end, I said, Bill, the solution, we were talking about Australia Post at the time. I said, the solution is a postal bank, and he said, I absolutely agree. I've had Liberals and Nationals emphatically agree with me on it. Problem is they won't lead, right? And that's where this inquiry or task force is a chance that we can herd it in that direction if people get involved. Some of the benefits, just off the top of my head, of a postal bank are for the consumer, guaranteed services, right? The banks, the branches are there, the post offices are there, and its job is to provide face-to-face services, right? Which meets everybody's need. If you want to do internet banking, fine. I do internet banking. I can't remember the last time I walked into a bank branch. I do remember the last time I walked into a post office, though. You've got to use the post office more regularly, right? So, yeah, that's fine. But sometimes you've got to go to the bank, and it's going to be there for elderly people, especially who that's the way they prefer to do their banking. They should be able to do their banking that way, and they can do it. So it's guaranteed service. It's guaranteed for your savings. If you're putting your money in a bank that's owned by the federal government, it can't go broke. Right? The owner cannot go broke, and therefore your savings are guaranteed. And that takes all these other risks out of the equation, especially risks of the political risks of things like bail-in that we've talked about a lot, where the new world order of if banks get into trouble because of their own speculation, there's the option where the regulator can take some of your money to prop that bank up. Right? Well, that's not going to happen with this system. The third thing it does is you can make sure, because the decision making of the bank, the commercial decision making, will be commercial, but it will not be dictated to by the pressure of having to return the highest possible rate of profit. You'll make sure that where that bank lends the money and invests the money, it's not going to be in totally speculative things that have a higher rate of return but are riskier, and therefore it will have an incentive to invest in the local community, right? So you can have local businesses come to the bank and borrow money for investment in those local businesses and keep that money circulating locally. That's what a postal bank can do. And then we've added the extra feature to our legislation that if there's surplus deposits that don't get reinvested back into the community through loans, those deposits can and should be invested in a national development bank or an infrastructure bank, right? So again, your money that you're putting into the bank goes into the economic development of Australia. That the long-term investment needs in infrastructure and helping industries expand, especially in regional Australia, that the private banks and the private sector will never do. Unless there's a huge rate of return on it for them, they'll never do it. But without that basic economic infrastructure, nothing functions, right? And you don't have a nation-building vision for the country. And your savings in the postal bank can actually do that. And the model for that is Japan Post. Japan Post and its postal bank is the most successful postal bank in the world. And the deposits of the post bank went entirely into the economic miracle that is the Japanese economy, especially post World War II. And it's amazing. So we could do that in Australia, right? That ticks all the boxes. And and for the purposes of this task force, what it removes is any need to worry about what the commercial decisions of the banks will be. If they want to miss out on the economic boom in regional Australia that's going to come from having this kind of institution, well, that's on them. But they won't be needed, right? And people will know they always have that banking service. That's what a postal bank can do. All right. So I heartily recommend this, and we can put these links below as well. Dale Webster is a journalist who's gone off on her own, and she's started this regional news service called The Regional. So she has a website here, theregional.com.au, and the first project that she embarked on was an analysis of this problem of the banks shutting their branches in regional Australia. And she's got a bunch of really, really excellent in-depth articles on that website. I'll just scroll down a little bit because the main thing I want to show you is this. She has this excellent interactive map. And there's a few versions of this, but what this map does is illustrate where the banks have been shutting their branches in Australia. And you can zoom right in and see it locally where it's happened. And it's in looking at this, Martin, that it illustrates the point you made earlier, that there's a race to get out, last man standing, right? Dale's work really shows this. And you can see where you are in regional Australia. You get on this map and zoom in, and you'll see the map document, the loss of banking services where you are. I'll just pull out of that. The other point that Dale makes, and this relates back to the point about ATMs, etc., and the bank's insistence that people are moving to electronic transactions. That's actually not the experience in regional Australia. What's happened in regional Australia, according to this article, but she backs it up when I say, so I'm giving her the credit here. What happens in regional Australia is that the public turn to this. And there's never been more cash sloshing around regional Australia. Now, that's fine because that is what's reliable as opposed to electronic services, because your 5G you don't even have 5G out there in most places. Your 4G will fall out and, all those sort of technological issues that you're exposed to. So people use the reliable option. But when there's too much of it and there's no bank branches to actually go and bank it in, you start getting security problems, right? This is you get the kind of circumstances that can attract the wrong element. And this is a serious issue. That's what's happened in regional Australia, not people suddenly just everyone using tap and go, like the banks are trying to imply they have. That's the serious point she made. And she really emphasizes that is an actual problem, because it's cash that's reliable, but if the cash system has to work with a banking system. So the post office bank would solve that because, one, the post office bank would not have an incentive to get rid of cash transactions, right? If that's what's convenient for people, it would have an incentive to support the cash payment system for all time. So cash would always be part of the economy. but two, it'll provide a safe place to bank your money, right? And there'll have to be some security upgrades and investment and that sort of thing, but that's much better than just having people getting used to putting a whole bunch of cash under the mattresses, because you'll start to attract the wrong element there. Okay, so all right, I want to show this. This is from Per Capita, is a sort of a left of centre think tank here in Australia, fighting inequality in Australia. And last year, they did an excellent report actually on their proposal for a postal bank. And this is the most striking map in their report. And those dots are Australia Post outlets that are more than 50 kilometres from the nearest bank branch. And the main thing I want to point out about that is there's plenty of them, right? But look at the distribution. It's not bunched around the capital cities. Now, if you put in every dot where an LPO is, of course, there'd be plenty bunched around the capital cities as well. That's not the point. The point is, that's what Australia Post provides as a service. It's not first and foremost dictated by commercial considerations. It's a service first and foremost. And that's why it'll make a beautiful outlet for a bank, right? Because wherever you are in Australia, you'll be somewhere close to a branch that you can always rely upon, and it'll even expand that, right? This is an excellent footprint, a retail footprint that Australia Post has now, and all these licensed post offices that provide these services do an immense service to the whole country. And then here's the other thing. I just wanted to play this, Martin. This is to illustrate how Christine Holgate had the foresight to address this problem, that because she got into trouble for it. Anyway, I'll just play the tape. This is Christine Holgate announcing her deal back in 2018 with the Commonwealth Bank. I just want to remind, we've used this on your show before. I just want to remind people how emotional she was when she announced the deal in October 2018.
Complimentary service to all of our customers. The deal with the Commonwealth, NAB and Westpac is worth $225 million over 5 years. Holgate was clearly passionate about the project.
If it was not for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, then we would have faced suspending this service and cutting post offices and undoubtedly hurting local communities and losing jobs. I am so appreciative to Matt Corming and the CBA team.
And what happened from that moment when Christine did that, and I know she was motivated, she was emotional because she knew how close those 1,195 regional communities came to losing all banking services. Yep. And she fought really hard to make sure it didn't happen. So she got the Bank at Post deal. In her enthusiasm, she gave the executives 4 watches. 2 years later, a Labor senator and Scott Morrison ganged up to force her out, and that led to the inquiry. But there's no evil that doesn't lead to a greater good. That led to the attention on this question of regional banking, and now we have this task force, right? And what we've got to make sure is that, as we said at the beginning, they don't sweep it under the carpet, right? They're forced to look at the fact there's a solution here that's win-win for everybody except the big banks, right? And their view shouldn't count. Go and make money. If all you care about, despite your what should be a social license, given that everybody knows you're going to be bailed out by the taxpayer if you ever got into trouble, if all you care about is maximising your profits and you're going to shut down branches everywhere, then your views don't count. We can have a system where the government sets up a bank that Australia desperately needs, operates through post offices, and regional Australia is set for banking services for all time.
Absolutely. And just to bring this to a close, I think we should introduce the concept of the universal service obligation. In other words, there are certain basic services that everybody across Australia should have from a banking perspective, yes. Right? And there should be no negotiation. Just saying, you can go online and do that, that is not going to cut the mustard, right? The second point is we've got a limited window here, right? So it's the middle of December.
Yes.
when this submission window closes. I know it's a busy time, Christmas and everything else, but I think this is such a really, really important issue, and we've already pushed the door ajar through the Australia Post inquiry and the decisions that were, flowing from the back of that. This is now the opportunity to take that next step and really drive home the alternative business model that's there, that means that regional Australia and regional businesses and regional households can thrive, but also make the point, as you did earlier on, this isn't just, far out in the bush, right? It's also true in much other closer areas to even our major cities too. So even if you are closer into the cities, I still think there's a very important opportunity to put a submission in and make the point about how we want banking to function into the future. And as I say, just saying, it's all digitalised, is not going to deal with it. So this is a really important opportunity, Robbie.
It is. And just one thing on your last point, I don't care, all city people, if you've experienced the frustration of losing local ATMs, you'd make a submission to this, right? Just express your views, swamp them with emails about basic things like that. It's not just regional. The aggressive dismantling of ATMs has inconvenienced people immensely. Many lower socioeconomic suburbs of major cities have suffered bank branch closures as well, right? All of you, please make a submission so that they don't get away with saying, see, it's just a evolution of technology. Right. Exactly. So yes, please. 18th of December is the submission due date. Click on the links below for the link to this discussions paper. Will explain where you direct your submission. Get involved, and we'll provide the other links that I think we should provide. Martin, is to Dale Webster's series of articles. Right, and you can just go and explore the interactive map and zoom in and see what you find.
Absolutely. That map is really, really powerful too. I did a show on it some time ago. And, we have the information. We know what the story needs to be. Now it's back to our viewers and listeners to once again get motivated, get activated, because we know we can make a difference. And this is a good example. We do. And sometime in the next week or so, Martin, you and I will do another update on the Sterling First inquiry, there was explosive hearings last week. We had to do this today, though, we can't cover both issues today. We'll do an update in the next week or so, and that is due to this process. People getting involved. It forced the inquiry, and all sorts of revelations are coming out about that. Absolutely.
So get involved, please.
Look forward to that, and thanks for your time today, Robbie.
All right. Thanks, Martin.
See ya. Bye.